Hello, today I'm in conversation with Yossi Sheffi, Professor of Engineering Systems at MIT and Director of MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. Yossi Sheffi is an expert in systems optimization, risk analysis, and supply chain management. He's the author of several award-winning books. He has published widely, and his research has made a profound impact both in academia and also in industry. His latest book, The New Abnormal, which we will hear about later, was published in October 2020 in record time. Now, under Yossi's leadership, the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics has launched many educational research and outreach programs. And it is, really with great respect for Yossi's work that I feel honored to be speaking to him today, but not just about his work, but to hear a little bit more about his personal journey. Now, Yossi, welcome. Let's start from the very beginning. What inspired you, and how did this journey begin in logistics and supply chain management?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Omera. And it's nice to be with you again. So I actually, I'm born in Israel, grew up in Israel, went to the Technion, which is the Israeli Institute of Technology, studied the civil engineering, but a lot of mathematics, because you could take courses anywhere at the time. I continue my graduate education at MIT when I study basically transportation and focus on transportation networks, the study of transportation networks. And for the first few years of my career at MIT, I was hired at MIT. I worked on urban transportation planning. I even published a book called a more mathematically oriented book rather than a business book about about mathematical programming of network and reaching equilibrium. This is basically a book aimed at Ph.D. students at MIT, not for the weak of heart. And then I started to get frustrated because I thought that my solutions for cities were great. We all think that what we suggest is great, but given that it was public sector, it was very hard to implement, very hard to get it into practice. As an engineer, I always wanted to get things into practice. So I kind of left field, and I got for a variety of, I was starting to work with some trucking companies and started developing software for optimizing trucking operation, all kind of software for truckload, for less than truckload. I actually even started a company at that point of working with trucking. Until today, many companies, this is 30 years ago, until today, many companies are using variation of the software that I developed then. And a lot of optimization, optimal dispatching, which truck should take which load, where to fuel a truck, all kind of optimization. And this is basically based on something that I developed at MIT about the ability to do very, very large scale optimization with millions of variables, millions of constraints. Because once you get through time, what will happen in the future to the truck, to the load, you start stepping through time and it creates millions of possibilities. And as an aside, we used to work in the company that I started. We used to have on the wall academic paper demonstrating that one cannot solve the problem that we were solving every day. So this was successful. But then we started branching for this and to working with shippers, both in my research and outside. We started working with research and developed, for example, algorithm for optimal purchasing from the shipper side of transportation services, and develop whole theory and a whole set of papers about it. At the time, I also started, this was the early 80s, and the transportation sector in the US was deregulated. which was a huge opportunity, of course. So I started another company that was basically the first, what you might call now 4PL company in the United States. At the time, I started with somebody from Rockwell, with Rockwell support, and Rockwell thought that we have to have a broker license because nobody saw an animal like this. So they asked us to get a broker license. The company exploded. It grew in 6 years. After 3 years, we took it out of Rockwell. We bought it from Rockwell because because the truck line that we work with thought that Rockwell is biasing in favor of their client, which probably they did. But so they started. So we had to get out because we couldn't expand. So we bought it from Rockwell. We got some investor, bought it from Rockwell. And in the next 3 years, just to give you an idea, this was before the internet, before, we grew in between the early 80s, we grew from a revenue of about $30 million to a revenue about $400 million in 3 years. And the wheels were coming off the wagon. We were an example of outsourcing because the company should outsource. And so we had only logistics engineer. We didn't have finance, we didn't have marketing. Everything was outsourced. So because we wanted to be an example of how outsourced. This was the early days before outsourcing became a big deal. And in any case, as I said, the wheels were coming off the wagon. We had freight wheels, we had boxes of freight wheels that were not being, that were in the corner. We were afraid we'll all go to jail. I was afraid that we'll go to jail. So I engineered a sale of the company to Ryder, which was a very white shoes, organized company. And it's now a $3 billion subsidiary of Ryder, the whole logistics operation of Ryder. And the CEO said in the Wall Street Journal, he said, it's the best. They made 150 acquisitions by then. Said the best acquisition they ever made. After that, I also was involved in several other companies in various areas. But at this point, the important thing, I was working with both shippers and carriers and understanding, getting into logistics, started working more with manufacturers, started working more with retailers, a lot of work with Walmart in particular, getting an understanding from the industry on supply chain and their challenges. So I started also on the research side, working on it. In particular, my foray into writing business books, always wrote papers, scientific papers, but foray into writing business books started after 9/11. Just before 9/11, MIT signed an agreement with the government of the United Kingdom. Tony Blair at the time it was a big ceremony with Tony Blair and the president of MIT. Actually, it had nothing to do with 9/11, but they wanted to do, the government of the UK wanted to understand why MIT generates so many startups, and Cambridge, which is just as good university in terms of academia, or Oxford, don't generate nearly as many. I mean, it's like 1 to 100 type of order of magnitude. It's like 3 orders of magnitude different. So they wanted to understand if this was the research. But I was on sabbatical in England, in Cambridge University, when 9/11 happened. So I was tied to some of the biggest companies in England, working with BT and BP and BAE on other issues. And the Home Office invited us to a meeting. The Home Office in England is where, MI5, MI6, James Bond works for the Home Office, so to speak. So they invited us to a meeting and asked what happened if the next Al-Qaeda attack is not going to happen on a symbolic target, like the World Trade Center or the Pentagon, but on an economic target, like a refinery or a port. And most of those assets were held by private companies. That's why they had all the big British companies around. And people look around, and I was invited because I was working at the time with BT, the management of BT on supply chain issues. People look around the table and nobody had an answer. To make a long story short, the UK government actually funded my research, and I started talking about how do companies manage risk, how they develop resilience. The word resilience actually was suggested, it came my first book came out. It was the Resilient Enterprise, and the word resilient actually was not in use at all. It's actually somebody at the MIT Press suggested it when we talked about title. It caught on like fire, and as luck would have it, also the book came out a week after Hurricane Katrina, which was a huge blow to the U.S. I don't know if you remember, but New Orleans was flooded. There were over 1,000 U.S. deaths. I mean, to see bodies floating on a modern U.S. City was unbelievable. I mean, such a failure was really unbelievable. Before COVID, we didn't have failures of that magnitude. After with COVID, of course, failures got different magnitude. But in any case, so the book was translated to 17 languages, I think, sold all over. About 10 years later, and just to go back, when I write one of these books, I do a lot of primary research. So I talk to companies. I talk to 100, or well over 100 companies. And 10 years later, many of the people that I interviewed came to me and said, look, you must write another book because there are more. This was after Japan and Katrina. In fact, Katrina, the book was finished a year before Katrina, just came out around Katrina, on Hurricane Katrina. So you have to make, there are more dangers and more risks, but we are also getting better. So I started a whole set of interviews and wrote another book, The Power of Resilience. In between them, I wrote another book on logistic clusters, on why logistic companies tend to be next to each other and why it's actually a good thing. Because people thought, why would a company want to be next to its competitors? Actually, it's a good thing for everybody, by and large. That's why these things are happening. And I have interviews in clusters around the world, including Singapore and Rotterdam and Zaragoza and Memphis and LA, Long Beach, and many of the big clusters around the world. And after that, I wrote a book on sustainability with a very different view about, rather than telling everybody they should consume less and be miserable, I suggest that this ain't happening. And I understand that global warming is happening, but people are not gonna go for it. And companies who are relying on this, even today, when there's a lot more talk about it, my view is that it's all talk. And the solution will be technology. Carbon sequestration, other things, because people also forget in all the talk that half the world population is living on less than $5 a day, and they just can't afford sustainability. It's a luxury good. But guess what? They want air conditioning, they want car, they want to eat meat, they want to get middle class. And what's the world gonna do when everything is gonna be middle class? So we need some technological solution. And of course, it's funny coming from an MIT professor, but it is what I really thought. The book got a lot of, even today, by the way, just 2 weeks ago, the Chinese translation was then designated by the Central Bank of China as the text for people to learn about sustainability throughout China. This just happened 2 weeks ago. The book was written 3 years ago. I was working, so I'm always working on a new book. And at the same time, as Omer mentioned, I work a lot with industry. That's where I get a lot of the inspiration and the understanding. I should just tell you that I had 5 startups. So students always come to me and say, hey, I look at this paper about next research, what problem I should work on? My answer is the same for everybody. Walk into whatever company you can walk into, a large company, and within a month, just open your eyes, you'll find 72 areas that you can work on and make things better. Don't look at the paper. Don't look at the getting some algorithm 5% better. It's meaningless. But there are real problems that industry is struggling with. And so start working with industry. First of all, you get network, a relationship and data, and you can work on real problems, but you'll also find real problems to work on. Anyway, going back, so I was working in March 2020. I was about a year into working on a new book that is deal with innovations in supply chain. I started, what I wanted to understand in my research and in the book is which of the new technologies and the new innovation are going to be really game-changing, and which are going to be just, like RFID. We thought RFID is going to change everything. RFID is still used, but it's used in niche product, in niche areas. And some of the things we're all excited about are going to be in it. Blockchain. Blockchain is not going away, but it's not going to change everything. It's too slow. And anyway, I don't want to talk about it now, but starting to understand, and with a historical perspective from biblical times and before, what change developed. So about 3/4 of the book is historical perspective of what kind of stuff changed supply chain, even though we didn't call it supply chain, what kind of stuff changed processes and what did not, and trying to develop a lens by which to judge the future. Of course, as Niels Bohr says, it's always dangerous trying to forecast the future, but try to do it. But in any case, on this is March 2020, we saw the supply chain, the world was blowing up. I said, okay, I stopped doing this. I usually have a large team working on it. Everybody go home, work, assign them to other stuff. Start working with a team of 2. And between March and August 2020, I wrote the book, The New Abnormal, reshaping business and supply chain strategies beyond COVID-19. This was very different way of writing. First of all, I basically slept 4 hours a night for about 5 months trying to write, but also it's like writing history while history is unfolding. So I wrote something and then things changed and I had to rewrite it to make it. So I think I got most of it right, but obviously not all of it because things were changing as I was writing it. And then in July, when I was close to finishing, I started talking to publishers. I talked to MIT Press, Harvard Business School Press, some commercial publisher, and they all said the same thing. They said, great idea, here is supply chain. Somebody with credential in supply chain is having a book on supply chain during the pandemic. Everything changed, it's great. Because, of course, supply chain became a big deal during the pandemic. Everybody now knows what we do. So, but they said, you submit it and it takes a year to publish. I said, you must be kidding. And one of them said, yeah, but we have a fast process. It takes only 10 months. I said, no. You take 10 months. Amazon takes 48 hours to publish. So what are you talking about? I mean, I told one of the CEO of a publisher that I look at, talking to you is like talking to a travel agent before Expedia. You don't even know that you're dead. I mean, Amazon does actually a nice job. Look at this. They do a very nice job with the book in 48 hours. Also, it's print on demand. So a month into the book, we found out a little mistake. You fix it. And then from this point on, all the books are fixed. In fact, I'm now writing another part of the book about the vaccination process. So we don't know if it will be a small independent book or we'll put another part for this book, but it can be done. You cannot do it with a publisher. It's very expensive. So it gives you a lot of freedom to do stuff. You also learn about dealing with Amazon, which is not for the faint of heart. Amazon does whatever Amazon wants. And you are, as an author, you don't have a power against Amazon. I mean, they just do. Amazon, for example, decided to cut the price by 40%. They just did it. They didn't even let us know. We said, okay, let us know so we can actually pretend that we are running a promotion or something. And no, they just do it. They don't. It's done by an algorithm, and you cannot argue with an algorithm. It's done. So anyway, so the book came out and selling well. In fact, as we speak, there's the Spanish translation. The Spanish again. When you do translation, we did the translation, and we just put it out. So the translation is finished this week. The book will be out. The book in Spanish will be out next week on Amazon, both in and in printed version. There's Chinese version, Korean version in the works. So it is getting out there. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, basically.
What a wonderful story, Yossi. It's been fascinating listening to you. I mean, throughout your career, I mean, not only have you been incredibly busy writing, and I've read many of your books, including this latest one, which I believe everybody should get a copy of because it gives so many good lessons for companies out there. And as you said, people now know, the importance of supply chain management, right? It's the
Yes,
roadmap is very clear now. I often said it's moved from the boardroom to the dining room, that even your grandma now knows the phrase supply chain management.
yeah,
So what a
exactly.
fascinating career, Yossi. And over the times, you've witnessed, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, like you said, that they've all had implications to your research, which, in some ways you could say were great opportunities, well, providing great opportunities for writing material and teaching material and case studies and so forth. But now, you've gone through several decades of this, if you don't mind me saying. But we could argue almost that COVID has been, there's been no such you know maybe catastrophe that's had such an impact on the supply chain profession. It's really sort of turned things on its head. So with this in mind, what would you say that the future is for the supply chain profession?
Okay, so you're right. I mean, people used to ask my wife, "What's your husband doing?" 2 years ago, she said he's researching supply chain management, and they say, "What is that?" Nobody asks what is that. They respond now, "Oh, that's important." I mean, it's important to do it. So clearly, it went down to the mainstream, as you say, from the boardroom to the dining room. Everybody understands it. In fact, the funny thing is, neighbor of mine, people ask for the book or buy the book because it's they want to understand what's going on. So that's clearly, and not only this, in companies, I'm sure you see it too. If you talk to companies, supply chain managers have been elevated. I mean, the importance has been elevated, and it will have a profound impact on. We also see investments in technology and supply chain management going at record speed. I mean, people were buying software, putting software in, putting software for visibility, putting software for robotic process automation, trying to make sure that they can automate a lot of processes quickly. Some of it went through without too much, at record speed, which means a lot of the bureaucracy of companies was not in the way. And it's really interesting. There are companies now who try to look at this and say what worked and what didn't work. We cut a lot of corners, for example, on legal reviews. Was it smart? I mean, so some of it was, some of it was not. And many task force in companies looking at what can we learn out of this, that we can do things a lot better, be a lot more flexible, yet not to create new risks at the same time. So that is something that companies are looking at, and it will create better processes in all area, and particularly supply chain management is one big process with many sub processes in it. So just looking at it and trying, getting of course there are other things. I mean, the fact that people got used to working remotely, it will have a profound impact, especially on supply chain management, because for large companies, there are multinationals around the world. And but even for others, if I work in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I can sit in Kansas City to work from,
Yeah.
because I have older parents or children in Kansas City, I can also be in Buenos Aires or New Delhi. And the company may like it because they may have business there. So this has implications in general, implications not only for workforce, but I think there'll be a new worry and a new cry about what I call white collar globalization. The first globalization was to get lower cost and go to get labor at the lower cost. When high level people, when white collar managers and software developers, whatever, they move the salary with them and they move the tax base with them. So who knows what will be the result of this? We're just the start of this.
Yeah.
We see the results in urbanization. In Boston, for example, prices are going down for the first time in years. Prices in big cities are down, especially commercial. Commercial office space is just, people are doing all kind of deals just to get tenants. And we are in the middle of an office building boom that started, 2 years ago, and now it's coming to the market. So there's huge pressure on office space. We see already in the suburbs, we see both stores and office space and apartment building converting to offices, because real estate manager think that most people would want to stay in the suburb and work in the suburb. So there are fundamental shifts. What will this shift mean for congestion, for pollution, for it's up in the air. We'll see what it will, but a lot of changes afoot. One of the best changes, by the way, I should mention, is telehealth. I mean, the fact that people were able to see the doctor online, a lot of doctors, it's great in the sense that, Boston and Boston, Minneapolis, there are certain medical centers in the United States. And the fact that, anybody in the United States can now get a session with a Harvard-educated Massachusetts General Hospital is actually good. I mean, that you'll have some of the best doctors doing the diagnosis. So telehealth is I think, a big change out of this, not specifically in supply chain, but for society. I think it's a big change. What I'm not sure is that what will happen with sustainability about this, because at the same time that people are talking about it and building better, a lot of people lost income, lost jobs. So, and they are going to keep preferring economic issues to sustainability issues. And you can see, I mean, we have a lot of talk on sustainability. If this is true, how come Amazon is doing so well? I mean, it's with all the packaging, with all the extra packaging, with all the sending onesies and twosies, into anybody in transportation can tell you that you get a package in 2 hours since the time you order it. The supplier cannot build an efficient tour, no matter what. I mean, it's just, they put it in a vehicle and it gets to you. Yeah. So this competition, and by the way, who needs something in 2 hours? But that's what the competition is. So as long as the society is not going to change, I don't see companies really change. For example, with Amazon have started the biggest, they spend decades building a huge network of fulfillment centers all around the United States to be able to do it in the same day and 2 day. Are they going to write it off? What are they going to do? They say, okay, now you get it only once a week. They have this offer. They have Amazon Day, and you do once a week, but it's not being used. People still, it's too easy getting it. Oh, it comes in 2 hours. Great. I mean, in big US cities, it comes in 2 hours. Yeah. So it's just, it's ridiculous. But it is what it is. I mean, and not lecturing to people, you should do better. It doesn't work. So let me finish on a hopeful note about this. And the hopeful note is that global warming and COVID have a lot in common. They are global issues, and there are issues where we see that asking people to behave better does not work. In fact, if it doesn't work when people have life danger, it's very hard to convince them that there are, I don't know, 30, 40% who don't want to get vaccinated. In Florida and Texas, you're not allowed to wear masks. It's just ridiculous. So it's, you see large swath of the population not want to have anything to do with it. And that's when there's a danger to themselves. So to tell them to behave differently when there's danger decades from now to the planet, it's hopeless. The solution for in the COVID case was technology, the vaccine. We developed a vaccine in record time and develop it and all this. And in fact, as I said, I'm writing now, trying to document it. With fascinating interview with the head of Moderna and Pfizer and some of the scientists who actually developed mRNA. But it was technology. The technology will help us get there. I think we will come to the realization that technology will help us with global warming. And we also find out that when the danger is real, money is no object. I mean, the trillions of dollars that this administration and the EU and others are pouring into solving the COVID issue show that when people feel that the danger is real, really money is no object. So I hope that some of the $1 trillion that people put into fighting the pandemic will be put into research, into carbon sequestration, getting carbon from the air, and things that can actually solve the problem. Anyway, we're going over lots of subjects beyond your question.
We are indeed, Yossi, and I think that's the dynamic nature of our profession of supply chain, and also the fascinating subject of supply chain. I think you've summed it up so well, and I think there's not been ever a greater time to be a supply chain academic or supply chain professional today.
Just to make the point, we are having record number of applications to our programs all over the world. Record numbers. I mean, growth, doubling, tripling the numbers everywhere. So.
Fantastic. That's so great to hear. Yossi, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your personal journey and also your perspectives for our In Conversation series. And I wish you the very best for your new section of the book, or potentially another book on vaccinations, because I'm sure it is going to be one that is not to be missed. So thank you very much, Yossi. Been great speaking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.